Chapter 4. Losing Control. The room was silent, save for the sound of their heavy breathing. Their lips met again, this time slower, more deliberate, as if savoring every second. Every kiss was a silent promise, a surrender to the magnetic pull they'd fought for too long. Olivia's back pressed against the cool wall, and Alex's hands found her waist, holding her tightly, as though she might slip away if he let go. The heat between them was almost unbearable, the energy electric. There was no more pretending that this was just a fleeting moment of weakness. It was more than that. His lips trailed down her neck, each kiss making her skin tingle with anticipation. She arched into him, her hands slipping under his shirt, feeling the hard muscle of his chest beneath her fingers. His touch was like fire, igniting every part of her. Every brush of his hand, every soft groan, sent shivers down her spine. "Olivia," he whispered against her skin, his voice rough and desperate. "Tell me to stop." But stopping was the last thing she wanted. Her fingers curled into his shirt, pulling him closer. "Don't stop." That was all he needed. His mouth crashed against hers again, and they were lost in the storm of their desire. It was a kiss that felt like it had been years in the making, like all the tension, all the hatred had been leading to this moment. His hands roamed over her body, memorizing every curve, every shiver. She gasped as his lips found the sensitive spot just below her ear, her knees growing weak beneath the intensity of his touch. He caught her, pressing her even closer to the wall, as if needing the solid surface to keep himself from losing control entirely. Her breath was ragged, her heart pounding, as his hands slipped under her shirt, exploring the soft skin beneath. She felt alive, more alive than she ever had before, and the way he touched her, the way he kissed her, made it clear that he felt the same. "Alex," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper, but he heard it. He always heard her. "I can't stop," he murmured against her lips, his hands tightening on her waist, pulling her closer, if that was even possible. "Not when it's you." The confession hung between them, heavy and undeniable, and for the first time, Olivia didn't feel the need to argue, to fight back. She wanted him, had wanted him for longer than she cared to admit, and now, in the heat of this moment, she couldn't pretend otherwise. Their bodies moved in perfect sync, every touch, every kiss, filled with an intensity that threatened to consume them both. It wasn't just about the physical. It was everything that had been building between them for months. The anger, the frustration, the desire. It was all there, fueling the fire that burned hotter with each passing second. Her hands found his face, pulling him back to her lips, and he groaned, deep and raw, as if she was the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. For a moment, they broke apart, gasping for air, their foreheads resting against each other. The room felt too small, too hot, but neither of them cared. "We shouldn't be doing this," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction, her hands still gripping his shirt, unwilling to let go. Alex's eyes were dark, filled with something more than just lust. "I know, but I don't care." And then, with one last glance, they were back in each other's arms, lost once again in the overwhelming intensity of their desire. Chapter 5. The Unraveling. Just as Olivia felt herself slipping deeper into the moment, completely immersed in Alex's touch, the loud buzz of her phone shattered the intimacy. She pulled back slightly, gasping for breath, her heart racing. Alex's lips hovered near hers, eyes dark with desire. But the interruption was like a bucket of cold water. "Ignore it," he murmured, trying to pull her back into the heat of the moment. But Olivia couldn't shake the feeling, that uneasy, gnawing sensation in her gut. Her phone buzzed again. She reached for it, still catching her breath. Alex groaned in frustration, stepping back to give her space. The tension in the room was palpable, but Olivia's eyes flickered with unease as she saw the name flashing on the screen. "Who is it?" Alex asked, his voice low, almost dangerous. She hesitated for a moment before swallowing hard. "It's my fiancé." The words fell like a bomb in the room. Alex froze, his expression shifting from passion to disbelief in an instant. His chest rose and fell heavily, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "You're... what?" Olivia bit her lip, guilt crashing over her like a tidal wave. She hadn't planned for this. She hadn't meant to fall into Alex's arms, but everything between them had been spiraling out of control for months. And now, the consequences were crashing down around her. "I was going to tell you," she whispered, but her words sounded weak, even to her. Alex's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. "When?" "After this." She didn't have an answer. The air between them was thick with tension, the fire that had burned so hot only moments before, now smoldering dangerously. "You said you didn't care," she whispered, her heart pounding painfully in her chest. She hadn't wanted this, hadn't wanted to hurt anyone. But here she was, standing in the wreckage of her own choices. "I didn't know you were engaged, Olivia." Alex's voice was harsh now, raw, with hurt and anger. He stepped away from her, running a hand through his hair, as if trying to make sense of everything. The phone buzzed again in her hand, and this time, she couldn't ignore it. With trembling fingers, she answered. "Hello?" Her voice was shaky, guilt lacing every word. "Hey, baby, just wanted to check in. How's everything going?" Her fiancé's voice was warm, familiar, and it twisted the knife in her chest even more. Olivia's eyes darted to Alex, who stood across the room, his back turned to her, shoulders tense. She could feel the weight of everything crashing down around her. "Fine," she whispered, her voice hollow. "Everything's fine." But nothing was fine. As she hung up, the silence between her and Alex was unbearable. She could feel his anger, his hurt, radiating off him like heat. "Olivia." His voice was low, dangerous. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. I thought this was something real." Her heart broke at the pain in his eyes. She'd wanted it to be real too. She'd wanted so badly to escape the reality of her life for just a moment, to lose herself in Alex's arms and forget everything else. But now, everything was falling apart. "It is real," she whispered, stepping toward him, desperate to close the distance. "Alex, But before she could finish, he stepped back, his hands up, as if to push her away. "No, Olivia, you don't get to do that." His voice was cold now, detached. "You don't get to break me like this, and still tell me it's real." Tears stung at her eyes as she realized how deeply she had hurt him. But before she could speak again, Alex shook his head, grabbing his jacket. "I need to get out of here." His voice was hoarse, pained. "Figure out whatever the hell this is." And just like that, he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Olivia standing alone in the quiet room, her heart shattering in her chest. Chapter 6. Torn Apart. Olivia stood in the stillness of her apartment, the silence deafening. The faint scent of Alex's cologne lingered in the air, wrapping around her like a bittersweet memory. Her phone lay forgotten on the counter, but the weight of her fiancé's words hung heavy in the room. Her chest felt tight, suffocating, like the walls were closing in on her. She had made a mess of everything. Her carefully constructed life, the delicate balance she had maintained between duty and desire, had crumbled in a matter of minutes. What have I done? Her legs felt weak as she sank down onto the couch, her head spinning. She could still feel the heat of Alex's touch on her skin, the way his hands had moved over her body, like he knew exactly where to ignite the fire within her. It had felt so right in the moment, but now, in the cold aftermath, she was drowning in guilt. Her phone buzzed again. This time she didn't need to look to know who it was. The weight of her engagement ring seemed heavier on her finger now, a reminder of the promises she had made, and the ones she was breaking. She pulled the ring off and set it on the table in front of her, staring at it like it held all the answers to her broken heart. But the answers didn't come. A knock on the door shattered her thoughts. Her heart leaped into her throat. Could it be Alex? With trembling hands, she opened the door, her breath catching when she saw him standing there, rain-soaked and looking like he was barely holding it together. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice rough. Olivia stepped aside, letting him in. His presence filled the room, his eyes burning into hers with so much intensity she could barely breathe. "Alex, No." He cut her off, his voice hard, but there was a softness in his eyes. "Let me talk first." She swallowed, nodding, her heart pounding. "I didn't come back here to argue or fight with you," he began, running a hand through his wet hair. I need to understand." His eyes searched hers, raw and vulnerable, in a way she had never seen before. It broke her heart even more. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Why didn't you tell me you were engaged?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "I didn't know how," she whispered. "I didn't plan for this to happen. I didn't expect to feel this way about you." Alex's jaw tightened, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "But you did." Olivia nodded, the tears spilling over now. "I did. I do. But it's complicated, Alex. My life. It's not as simple as just walking away." "Then what do you want from me?" His voice was strained, a mix of anger and pain. "Do you want me to just be some secret, some fling you can forget about once you go back to your perfect little life?" "No," she cried, stepping toward him, desperate to make him understand. "It's not like that. You're not a fling. You mean more to me than that." "Then what am I, Olivia?" His voice cracked, his frustration boiling over. "Tell me what I am, because I don't know anymore." She reached out to touch him, but he stepped back, shaking his head. The distance between them felt like a chasm now, impossible to bridge. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know what you are to me. All I know is that I can't stop thinking about you, and when I'm with you, everything else just fades away." Alex's eyes softened for a moment, but the hurt was still there, simmering beneath the surface. "I can't be your escape, Olivia," he said quietly. "I can't be the thing you run to when your life gets too hard. I need to know where I stand with you." Her heart broke at his words, knowing he was right. She had been selfish, caught between two worlds, and in the process, she was losing everything. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry." Alex stared at her for a long moment, the silence stretching between them. Then, finally, he sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I can't do this," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "I can't keep pretending like this is okay." Olivia's heart shattered. She had known this moment was coming, but it didn't make it hurt any less. "Please," she whispered, her voice desperate, "don't walk away." Alex looked at her, his eyes filled with a sadness that broke her even more. "I have to," he said softly. "I have to, or I'll lose myself in this mess too." And just like that, he turned and walked out the door, leaving Olivia standing in the middle of the room, her world collapsing around her.